Well, welcome everyone to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game. I'm your host, Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money color commentator. On today's show, the cyber liability of a data breach, part 3 of our series on asset protection strategies for businesses with Ike Devji, attorney and asset protection specialist. Welcome to the third segment, Ike.
Thank you, Steve.
Ike, this has been in the news. I mean, we're talking major league. I'm thinking I'm just a little pawn in this whole, how can I defend myself when the Department of Defense can't defend itself, when the United States government, when Hillary, and now we have this ransomware out there. How do you defend yourself against, if I'm just an employee and I don't know if the government can't do it, how can I do it?
Well, you make some great points. And yes, the news, unfortunately, gets a little worse for all of us as consumers or for business owners and employers every day. As you said, we've seen the ransomware attack. We've seen the WannaCry virus recently that's come out. And you're right. If United Healthcare and Hillary Clinton and the biggest corporations in America can't keep their emails safe, how is the average citizen or business owner supposed to do so? Well, the fact is, number one, if you own a business, you have that legal liability and responsibility. So what business owners still have...
Can I stop you just for a second? You said, I get that first part. I know I have I know I have a liability, but I thought I just heard you have a legal responsibility. Did I just hear that?
You did.
Okay,
you did.
So
you heard it right,
right.
And your careful listening is very astute. There are a couple of different ways that, let's talk about the underlying liability here. Sure, everybody feels bad if they get hacked and their information and other people's information that had been entrusted to them gets exposed, right? So we get that there's a general, hey, my bad, I feel bad about that, I'm very sorry. There's also some very specific legal liability you have. And one of the ways in which, for instance, a HIPAA breach, where you have healthcare information that's exposed, is either judged the amount of responsibility that is attributed to the source of the leak, the person who gets hacked, includes what steps did you take to prevent this from happening? Did you have firewalls in place? Did you have an IT security system in place? Did your business have a security protocol that every employee was trained on and informed of? These are the ways that attorneys, these are the questions that courts and attorneys are asking when determining how much of the liability to stick the business owner with and blame them for the third-party criminal hacking. It's like saying, well, you didn't lock the door. Right? You have a legal responsibility as a business owner to lock the door on this information and put it in a safe and lock it up tight and put a Rottweiler outside. And that, what we mean by that in computer terms is computer security protocols, passwords, antivirus programs, and data breach and cyber liability insurance to cover all of the mistakes and things that you can't prevent.
I'm thinking everybody has this responsibility, and the exposure is intense. If the United States government's having problems, we could have problems. The normal businessman, I'm thinking the small businessman or woman who owns a business, let's just say it's under 50 just to keep the mindset like Obamacare. We're under the 50. What kind of numbers, what kind of premium am I going to have to shell out to get this protection? And I'm going to agree with you. I have to still to get the antivirus. I have to do firewall. I have to put protocols in place. I have to train employees. They have to sign off that they received the training. Let's just say we're really good to go on that. But I still have a premium to pay here. I mean, I have property casualty insurance. I lock the door. I'm not going to leave it open. So I have good common sense here. Right. So what is my lock the door? I've locked the door the best I can in here. What kind of premium do I have to shell out to protect for data breaches just like this?
Again, as with the other forms of insurance that we've discussed, it is an underwriting-specific question that is specific to what kind of information you have, how serious it is, numbers, volume, number of employees, numbers of exposure.
You deal with physicians a lot.
Right, and physicians certainly are the sort of the poster child for this, because not only do they have HIPAA-protected information, healthcare information, which under federal law carries a minimum penalty for every single one of those records that gets exposed. They also have payment information. They have credit card numbers, checking account numbers, social security numbers, addresses, birth dates. So they have, on the one hand, one lump of information, which is very serious and the federal law says you have to protect, which is the patient's private identifying information about, you know, all of their personal details. And then you have all of this general financial information that the bad guys could have a field day with, right? And remember, it's not just doctors who have this problem. Any business owner that takes payments, that handles credit cards, that gets information that is confidential, every law office, every CPA office, anyone that handles any kind of confidential information should be concerned about this and the costs of it, not just exposure, but as you brought up, ransomware or data recovery. What if you run a business that runs on the records that you keep and knowing what people have and don't have and being able to look back at all of those records is also another form of liability protection for every business, right? If you own a repair company and you need to know in your files in your computer what your company did, when, for whom. What if your entire database gets locked up by the bad guys? How are you going to cover the cost of trying to reconstruct that database, and how expensive would that be? So this data breach and cyber liability insurance protects you from the bad actions of criminals who are hacking you. It protects you, hopefully, from the mistakes that your employees would make internally. It would protect you for hopefully some of the costs of recovery if somebody locks you up and
this is all inclusive
holds
in
you
your
at
policy?
a gunpoint. Well, it depends on the policy,
okay.
right? So it's like saying car insurance. Well, do I have a $15,000 minimum policy or do I have a deluxe policy with $1 million umbrella and heavy levels of uninsured and underinsured? So just saying car policy doesn't mean anything. Just saying data policy increasingly the same way doesn't mean anything. The fine print matters, working with an expert matters, and knowing what you should buy matters.
Okay, so I'm trying to think I was in an office of one of our financial advisors. Financial advisor
who should certainly have that coverage.
Certainly, because he's got unbelievable information. He's got a staff of 8, and he's pulling in a considerable amount, probably I'm going to say $1 million plus a year in revenue, gross revenues. And his little operation, I can't imagine him having the protection you just talked about.
And I'm glad you brought this up for financial advisors in particular. When I have asked financial advisors, and I protect many affluent, successful financial advisors personally all over the country, because many of them, after sending me their clients for years, will pick up the phone and say, hey, you did this for a bunch of my clients, maybe you should do it for me. And I run them through these same questions. What we routinely find is that they have somewhere between $0 and $50,000 in total data breach and cyber liability coverage. Now, what happens if they get hacked? Now, we had one advisor that I work with closely who had the client's AOL account got hacked. The client had made a fund transfer request to the advisor. The bad guys had been watching these emails go back and forth, and the bad guys slipped in to the conversation using the client's same language, tone of voice, font, signature line, everything, indistinguishable. The advisor didn't get hacked, the client got hacked. We'll make a long story short here for the purposes of our time together. At the end of the day, the liability ended up getting hung on the advisor when a certain amount of money went out to a place that it shouldn't have, despite the fact that the hack did not originate with the advisor. And if most of the advisors who are watching this and listening to us check with most advisors have a forced placed E&O policy with their broker dealer. If they either have none or they have a very little, small, inadequate amount of data breach coverage as part of that, and they need to get a separate policy or pay for a rider that brings them up to at least $1 million.
Is this expensive coverage?
It's a couple $1,000s a year.
Okay, so it's not that bad for all the hassle that it could cause.
But Steve, we are covering a bunch of different kinds of liability insurance, and here's a point I think we should probably make more than once. the total cost of having everything that we're going to talk about in this series in place is typically less than or equivalent to the cost of the retainer that you will have to take to a lawyer's office to defend yourself on just one of these issues.
Just one. Wow.
And the retainer payment, as you know, is what we're going to demand to start. Right? That's that you're going to have to show up with that $10,000 or $15,000 day one to have us start working on this, and then we're going to ask you for more after we burn through that. Or you could have been covered for all these different things for that much.
There's so much to consider, and yes, I mean, we're living in a very exposed environment now, and then cyber attacks are just ruthless.
Crime has moved offline, has moved online from the streets.
Wow. Well, don't forget to watch our next segment, The Need for Directors and Officers Liability Insurance, part 4 of our series on asset protection strategies for business. And keep in mind, before moving forward with any of the ideas you hear on our show, always check with your tax consultant, legal counsel, and financial advisor. You've been watching Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game.